Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Hurricane HQ&A this afternoon. It's Thursday afternoon, the 18th of September. We have a little breaking news this afternoon. There's been another earthquake over by the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, and it indeed is producing a tsunami, apparently. But there are no alerts out currently for Hawaii. What they're saying is that they're evaluating it right now. They have a forecast of 1 to 3 foot tsunami in Hawaii, which apparently is just under their threshold for an advisory. They do have a tsunami advisory out for the Aleutian Islands, the end of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. But they say they're going to issue statements if you're in Hawaii, and they're going to issue statements every hour or so. Right now, if a tsunami arrives, and probably there will be some energy in the ocean, they're scheduling it for 2:51 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. That would be 8:51 Eastern Time. So just in case anybody is watching from Hawaii and you haven't heard, but I imagine you probably have. All right, so we're here, been here every week, and it's worked out so well. We decided to continue on doing these Q&A sessions. The idea here is to be able to connect with folks at home if there is an event. Obviously, we get a lot of input. We haven't had in the past a good way to kind of exchange ideas and find out what people are concerned about and interested in. So that's why we developed this system. And today we're joined by Dan Brown. Now, you might have been expecting Jamie Rome. Jamie, turns out, is stuck in jury duty this afternoon, but Dan is the branch chief, is the name of the title at the Hurricane Center of the Hurricane Forecasters Unit. So Dan manages the people that make hurricane forecasts. So any kind of question you have about how hurricane forecasts are made or the models or anything like that, and pretty much anything else. I've known Dan a long time. Dan can answer just about any question. So Dan, welcome to our afternoon session here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.
And we have obviously a weird storm out there right now. So this Gabrielle doesn't look much like any or most tropical storms that come along. I imagine that Mother Nature is really annoying sometimes, right? You go ahead and name the storm because you found the winds and it's close enough, and then it kind of misbehaves and looks kind of ugly. Is there some resistance to calling it something else temporarily when you do think it's going to turn into a hurricane? At least that's the forecast at the current time.
Yeah, we've had some discussion here about whether we could call it post-tropical, but keep the forecast going. It looks like it still could be a threat to Bermuda in a few days. I think we want to give it a little bit of time before we make the change in status to see if that thunderstorm activity starts to come back. In the last couple hours, we've seen a little bit of that on the east side, and some of our model guidance suggests that might happen as we get into the evening and overnight hours tonight. So I think we want to give it a little bit more time. But yes, it is a pretty disheveled tropical storm at the moment.
All right, well, let's take a look at it and look at the other views we have and what's going on out there, and then we'll get back to you. All right, so what Dan was talking about is that little cluster. Let me see if I can circle it. Jordan, it's not letting me actually circle the storm, but it's maybe I can point. Let me see if I can point. All right, it's that little area right there. Let's see if we go close up here. If I can, I can't make it do anything. Well, you know what, Jordan? It is doing it, isn't it? Interestingly, I'm not seeing it here in front of me, but I'm seeing it online. You folks at home are seeing more than I'm seeing. Okay, so let me just back up 1 second here, and because I wanted to look at it close up. All right, Jordan, it's not letting me do it. But look at that. And what you see is a lot of dust. But more than that, there's dry air kind of blowing in from the southwest to the northeast over top of this system. So the dry air is a thing. Let me see. Can I draw? No, it won't let me. Oh, there it goes. So obviously some kind of issue with our system here. But in any case, the dry air is affecting it in that area right in there where Jordan is drawing. And Jordan, draw the little bundle of thunderstorms around the east side of the eye that Dan was talking about, if you're able to do that. That's not that one actually. It's that one right there. Yes, it's that one right there. All right. So let's go ahead forward, Jordan, if you can advance that, and let's take a look at the forecast from the Hurricane Center. And here you see they hold it at 45 miles per hour. And and Dan, let's talk about for a second this distinction between a tropical system and a non-tropical system. And as you say, this one really doesn't hasn't had the form of a tropical system because the thunderstorms where Jordan initially drew them were way displaced from the center. That is a key component to the criteria. Am I right there?
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, last night, kind of late yesterday afternoon, it did have the criteria kind of finally come together.
Mhm.
We had a better defined circulation yesterday afternoon. It had thunderstorm activity, although they weren't real close to the center, but it was enough organization that we went ahead and named the system yesterday. It certainly has had the winds here for a day or two. We've seen that with the scatterometer data. Provides wind estimates over the open ocean,
Mhm.
and it certainly had tropical storm force winds really since yesterday morning. And but it lost that thunderstorm activity overnight and this morning. When that does that, we usually like to give it a little bit of time because it is still over warm water. We know there's dry air and wind shear that it's battling, but those thunderstorms, are expected to redevelop. And looking out further in time, it does look like conditions become a little more favorable. It's probably going to take some time for that dry air to mix out, but the shear is forecast to decrease as we move into kind of later tomorrow and then over the weekend. And that's why we are forecasting it to eventually strengthen, potentially becoming a hurricane.
Yeah, and up as it gets near Bermuda, actually, the water gets a little warmer, and you don't have that same with the wind shear, the strong upper level winds pushing the dry air into it. So in theory, that will allow it to pull itself together. Here, by the way, are the spaghetti plots of the various possibilities for the models, and you can see in terms of Bermuda, looking at the GFS, the ECMWF, and the new Google AI model. We'll talk a little bit about that new AI model. It's really interesting this year to have access to those. And you can see the consensus is that it does stay well to the east, with the slight chance there that in Bermuda the GFS has a slight chance. But I guess what comes into play here is my line that if a system is disorganized or just organizing, that forecasts are subject to large errors and likely to change. I think that applies in this case, don't you, Dan?
Absolutely. I do some concern that the longer it stays weak, the maybe the further west it gets before
Hmm.
it starts making that turn, which could put Bermuda a little bit more into play. I think we're seeing that a little bit with some of the GFS solutions that are a little bit closer to Bermuda.
Right.
Something we'll watch. We do have some reconnaissance aircraft flights scheduled starting on Saturday because of the threat to Bermuda, and the plan is to send those out unless the models were to shift further to the east and lessen that threat.
Yeah, and the consensus certainly is to the east, and that's where your most of the cone would indicate to the east. So Bermuda should continue to watch it. All right, let's talk about these other systems that are that are in that dust, that kind of dust front. I mean, you can kind of see it; it's right there. Can you see it pushing out ahead there, the on the edge, right in there, and the clouds over the ocean out there are the type that when there's dust, when there's dry air, the clouds, the showers can't form very high, and you end up with those kind of clouds. So all that indicates a very dry atmosphere out there. And we have these two systems. One that you're not talking about anymore, and another one that you are sort of. But this one down to the south still, it's a little bit interesting because some of the models way in the future indicate that it has some shot at development. But there's the development area for the one that's over Africa now. And these development areas are all for the next 7 days, right? So if something isn't going to happen in 7 days, is why you would take the percentage off. Is this just dry air? Is that the main thing going on here? It's plowing through just super dry air?
That seems to be the issue. Been dry air and across the tropical Atlantic. It's been just more stable than usual the last few
Mhm.
weeks, and that really has prevented sustained thunderstorm activity with these systems, and has really what's prevented development. We saw that with what was, I believe, Invest 91. Uh,
91L, yeah.
yeah, a week or so ago, and really has persisted. I mean. Gabrielle was able to form, but yet it has not strengthened very much due to those conditions.
Yeah, it's really been well, I don't know, surprising, I guess is the thing is the world is so different now because we have all these tools and we can look at all this stuff kind of microscopically compared to what we used to do. But there used to be slow hurricane seasons, right? And when the Atlantic just was not conducive, the tropical Atlantic just plain old wasn't conducive for development.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had an inactive season. There certainly have been some of those. I joked earlier with some staff today that there may be people aren't old enough yet to remember some of those past seasons. I started here in 1993, and that first season I was here in 1994 was a pretty inactive season.
Right.
I really one of the least inactive and since then we're having now. And so there are some similarities to that season where there was a really long period of inactivity in that kind of late August through mid-September time period.
Yeah, and then everything changed in 1995, and
Correct. Yeah.
and it's like the switch got flipped on. But there also, just because the tropical Atlantic has been shut down, doesn't mean that the Caribbean and the Gulf might not be active, right? In fact, we've seen some of those long-range models kind of wanting to develop something there. And I was making note of this. So there are those two very, very weak systems, and the one over Africa is the one that has the 20% on it, and the other one is the one that did have 20% on it, but now 0% over the next 7 days. So anyway, if we can put that into motion, let's see if we can make that go forward in time here. Let's see. There you can see it moving forward. The idea is that when we get to next Tuesday, we essentially have something of a moisture surge heading into the islands with this one. And both of them, notice, are not deep green anymore because there's dry air. It's gotten in there and they've gotten pretty weak. And we go a week into the future because it just really isn't even worth thinking about farther than that. Notice that they're on a more southern track. So they're not getting picked up because there is a bit of a pattern shift going on to the north. The forecast is for general high pressure to form over the Atlantic and replace that opening that Gabrielle is taking. We'll see. And we're talking about a week in advance. We're talking about weak systems, and but sometimes these systems, like happened last year, like we've seen, can can be part of development in the Caribbean and the Gulf. So anyway, any other thoughts on what's actually going on out there right now, Dan,
Uh,
and with the difference between what's going on in the Atlantic and then as we switch to later in the month, moving to the Gulf and the Caribbean?
Yeah, I think you really described it well there. That we do have to still watch for these waves. They may not develop out in the tropical Atlantic, the main development region, but they certainly can kind of sneak under south side of that ridge, end up in the Caribbean, Western Caribbean. We are heading into that time of year, which we really start to look back toward the western portion of the basin, the Western Caribbean, the Gulf, Western Atlantic for development. And there has been at least some hints of that in the longer range models. The system that we ended up taking out of the outlook today, may have some development potential as we get beyond a week in those areas. It'll be something to watch over the next several days. Some of the AI models that we're looking at is certainly hinting at that. The latest European ensembles maybe have a few weak lows in kind of that western southwestern Caribbean
Mhm.
by around day 10. So the season is not. I don't think the season's over yet. We still have a couple months to go, and we'll have to see how the rest of the season does play out.
Yeah, the Google DeepMind AI model is actually a little excited about the possibility of some kind of development, but as I say, they bounce around and where it might develop and so forth. So there's really nothing to look at this point. But I guess the question is, when the models, in your experience, when the long range models, we don't have really much experience with these AI models,
Yeah.
right? Looking at them in the long term. But I guess the question is going to be if they show more development and if models in general show more development in the long range, does that give us some indication that they think that the overall pattern might be more conducive, even if the specific where it develops and how it develops, you know, can change model run to model run. But if
Yeah,
it keeps developing, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that is a fair assessment that we do look for, especially in those ensembles. Are there clusters of lows, highlighting or hinting that there might be development in those areas? But I think you're really right. You can't get into the details on something that's beyond 7 days. So often people are looking at these long-range deterministic models where it's just one single run, and you
Right.
really can't do that because the ensembles are much better, giving you that indication of where something might form, but you're really not going to get the details at those long ranges. And I just think, we look at the models at present, it's starting to look like potentially maybe more favorable conditions, at least in the Western Caribbean, as we get toward the end of the month, and it'll be something that we'll certainly be looking for here.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be unusual if that were the case, actually, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yep, you're
that's
absolutely right.
it's exactly where we look. I mean, how many storms have we been through that have formed in the Caribbean later in the year, or not, or into the Gulf, or so forth. So that's where we look. That would be the average thing. So, so let me just ask you one question, and then we'll just see what the audience is interested in about these AI models, Dan. You have been, I know you've been using the Google
Mhm.
DeepMind model, and I think you guys are looking at other models, the European AI at least, and maybe some others. Well, what's your first impression here, since this is really our first year taking a close look at these things?
Yeah, I think we are looking at them. We are adjusting the European and Google DeepMind trackers in our system that we make our forecasts, so we can see them as the spaghetti diagrams, and certainly are looking at those. I think they're showing some promise, especially the Google DeepMind model, but we have to be a little cautious. One storm, one season. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best model out there. Kind of really have to take a look at a pretty large sample size. We have gone back and looked at a couple years worth, and it does seem like the Google DeepMind model does show a lot of promise.
Mhm.
And I know it did pretty well for Aaron, and it's done pretty well for a couple of systems we've had in East Pacific. But really, each storm can be sort of different characteristics. Does it stay weak? Is it a recurvature? Because there's really different error characteristics from the models in the forecast for those different types of scenarios. And so it really is going to be spending more time evaluating that. We'll take a really close look at all those AI models after this hurricane season, and I think we'll have a better picture by that point as to just how good they really, good or bad, or they really are.
Yeah, it's not just the average error that counts. It's also the biases, right? The biases that make a difference. Does it tend to always want to turn the storm north too soon, or something like that? So you can have the a low error, but have something that is off on a regular basis, and you really have to evaluate multiple storms to see that. All right, Jordan. Let's see what folks are interested in this afternoon.
Yeah, so we got a lot of questions coming in. People watching from Florida, North Carolina. We've got some folks from England here joining as well. Our first question is a little bit about what you guys were just talking about. From Lance on Facebook, can you explain why the operational model runs can be so different than the mean consensus of the ensembles?
Yeah, well, give me
No,
go
go
ahead,
ahead, Dan.
Brian.
No, I was going to say, Dan, this is your bailiwick. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can see some differences between kind of that single deterministic run and the ensembles, and it can be from a variety of factors. It could be the operational run maybe showing that model to be stronger or weaker than say all the consensus runs that go into that. It can sometimes we see kind of a bifurcation of a splitting of the models at one point in the forecast,
Like
and
a
that may
fork in
be
the road. Yeah.
yeah, correct, and it may be just how strong or deep that system is in the atmosphere at that point, where it may feel the effects of a trough or a weather feature that might help maybe steer it off to the northeast versus something that's shallower that's not going to feel that more deep layer steering flow and maybe have a chance to turn it more back to the west. So we see that occur in a single model run, whereas the ensembles are running it several dozen times, and then you may get sort of a better indication of what the chances are of it doing one track versus another by looking at those ensembles.
Yeah, well, the ensembles, the idea is to give you a distribution of reasonable possibilities, right? That's the idea. But this is a really good question, Lance, and I'm glad you asked this because it reminds me. So, Dan, help me here, but currently, isn't the resolution? It used to be that the resolution on the ensembles was just a lower resolution run of the model, right? And so you expected kind of different results because of that. But with the European ensembles, aren't they all the same resolution now? Is there some
Correct.
other fundamental difference that I don't know between the deterministic run and the various ensemble members, or are they really the ensemble members just 50 or 51 examples of the deterministic model?
Yeah, to my knowledge, you're correct. That grid spacing is the same now. The resolution is the same. It's just really different initial conditions that produce the different forecasts. So, the deterministic run is really just one of those many members now. So you may not want to put as much faith in that single deterministic run as you would want to just looking at the several dozen ensembles that we have.
Now, the Google AI model is different in that there is no deterministic run. The forecast from that model is just the mean, the average of the ensembles, right? But I think the GFS there still is a lower. The ensembles are still lower resolution. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, Lance, that's a great questions. But these days we tend now to look at the ensembles much more than the deterministic runs, just in general, to understand the possibilities of where a storm might go and how strong it might be. All right, Jordan?
Yeah, so our next question coming in, also on Facebook. A little bit about some chatter online that's also coming from our TikTok audience as well. Monitoring them. Thanks for watching. Some talk about the storm in the Caribbean, a storm from the Caribbean. So the question is, a storm could potentially be in the Gulf. Should Southeast Georgia worry about a storm from the Caribbean?
Well, I guess the answer to that is it depends on the track. I mean, certainly we've had storms that have affected Southeast Georgia. Helene affected a good part of Georgia, came out of the Gulf and the Caribbean. But I don't know, Dan, you have any other thoughts?
No,
It's kind of a track question, right?
Yeah, I just say it's really way too early to tell. You can't really get into specifics at this range. And I would just say too, I remind people that before a system has actually formed and has a center, there's going to be a lot of changes and updates to that forecast, and a lot more uncertainty in those cases. Right. And that's just something to take home. Even when you see those Invest models that we run models on Invest, oftentimes there's still not a well-defined center yet. And those models can shift around and create a lot of uncertainty in the forecast.
Yeah, just organizing disorganized or slow-moving systems are subject to forecasts are subject to large errors. All right, Jordan.
All right, our next question coming in from Don on Facebook. Does the lack of tropical activity allow warmer waters that can fuel storms later in the season?
All right. Think about that, Dan. I guess a little bit, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we certainly haven't seen that much cooling in parts of the basin because we haven't had a lot of activity.
Except for Aaron. Aaron left a big cool wake off the East Coast. But
I was going to mention, yeah, Aaron left a big cool wake across the Western Atlantic. So that does happen. that can influence the intensity of a future storm that takes a similar track. But areas of the Caribbean, Gulf have not seen those storms. So still a lot of warm water across that portion of the basin.
Yeah, although the northern Gulf has actually cooled a bit because of this cold front, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's been a strange year for the weather pattern in general, and no doubt the lack of tropical activity is related to the fact that we've had this semi-permanent feature over the eastern part of the U.S. that's parked a front over Florida. I mean, in September, this is early, even in August, I think the front arrived, right? The first one. So this is just an unusual weather pattern, and that finally has cooled off the northern Gulf. But there's plenty of warm water for tropical systems to develop. No shortage of that for sure. Jordan?
Yep. Next question coming in is kind of a follow up from what you guys were just speaking about a minute ago. Is there any discussion within the professional community to highlight the use of ensembles over deterministic solutions for undeveloped systems for the general public?
Well, this is a communications question. It's hard. This is what I've been doing for a living for a long time. And Jordan, if you could bring up, maybe I can. Let me see if I can display it, and you can show it there. The ensembles that we were showing today, and this is just a new thing we're doing this year, is actually coloring them by the various models, and you see that the European model has 51 ensemble members, and the Google AI model has 50, and the GFS model has 31. Is that right, Dan? Currently, I think
somewhere in that range. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so the idea is to each model gives you a certain spread, and when you look at them all together, in theory, you then end up with a consensus idea of where the spread could be. But how you communicate that, and because in the end, people want to know, is the storm going to form, and is it going to come in my direction or not, right? I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, you manage the group that has to communicate from the Hurricane Center, Dan. How do you treat this kind of discussion?
Yeah, I mean, we use them here a lot, not only in the forecast itself, but to help understand what the uncertainty is and help to communicate that. So when we see a big spread in the ensemble guidance, so, we would talk about that as being a lower confidence forecast, more uncertainty. Versus something when they're all tightly clustered. In this case, it's kind of about down the middle. I mean, this isn't a huge spread, but I think what the uncertainty for Gabrielle at the moment is just how weak it is, and whether or not that might cause it to slide further west. Because again, with the ensembles, you do tend to look at what the strength of those ensemble members are, because sometimes you do see patterns where the stronger systems would tend to move maybe more to the right than say the weaker members, and I think that's a really useful a tool to look at as well, and we do use that a lot at the Hurricane Center. And you'll see us mention this in our discussions quite a bit, where we'll talk about the ensembles and the guidance. And again, the confidence is really based on the spread of these ensemble members.
Yeah, it doesn't work 100% of the time. I remember, and I'm sure you do too, Ian. Ian was spread all over all the way from the Panhandle to Southwest Florida, the ensembles, and then suddenly they were all aimed at Tampa, and then they kind of shifted around, and and back then we were only looking at the GFS and the European, and we didn't have the AI model as well, but it works most of the time. So that indeed, the bigger the spread in the ensemble, the less certainty in the forecast. So as Dan was saying, this actually looks relatively certain, but we have the knowledge here that we have a disorganized, very shallow system, and that adds its own uncertainty into how the ensemble members get initialized. So that changes the mental dynamic there just a bit. All right, Jordan?
Yep. So our next question coming in, an interesting discussion happening with our TikTok audience. And also on Facebook as well. We have a lot of viewers from the Southeast that are talking about how they had snow back in February, but yet they haven't had hardly very much at all for this hurricane season. And a question that came out of that was, do hurricanes and snowstorms have something in common?
Well, I mean, they're both low pressure systems, but I wonder if the question has to do with a high amplitude pattern, right? You don't get snow in the south unless you have a very high amplitude jet stream that drive the cold air very far south, and that's what we've had. We've had this, just think there's a cold front sitting over Florida. It's kind of a stationary front now. It's been here so long, but that's a high amplitude pattern, and we've had just a very wavy pattern over the Atlantic, which is just not conducive to tropical development unless it happens to find a little slot. I don't know. Can you make a correlation there, Dan?
Yeah, I'm not sure that you can. It's certainly not my area of expertise. I can tell you that I first saw snow as a kid up in the Jacksonville area in January of 1977, and I don't think that hurricane season was that active either. But
Yeah.
I don't know we can make a big correlation here. But it is interesting. I mean, perhaps you might be right that you just get a very over amplified pattern in those years, which perhaps does influence shear and other factors across the Atlantic.
Yeah, January 19th, 1977. The snow in Miami. The one time it actually snowed, although the official observation at the Miami airport did not show snow. For some reason, that's never been exactly clear to me, since there was snow all over the place. And I actually forecast snow for Miami for Christmas Day, 1989, on Friday, because there was a chance. Right, it ended up being a high of 45 and windy and the coldest day ever, but it was too dry this far south to snow. But it snowed down to Lake Okeechobee on that Christmas 1989, which was horrible because the power was off and we had a horrible time cooking the turkey. I remember that. Jordan?
Our next question, a little bit of a slightly different direction. Good question for you guys there. Does a hurricane category 3 or better and does not hit land, is it retired?
Dan, so the answer is no.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
explain the retirement, process in general. I mean, it is subjective, but what's the process for a name getting retired?
Yeah. So there's a group called the Hurricane Committee that's part of Region 4 in the World Meteorological Organization. It includes representatives from basically every country in the Caribbean, Central America, Canada, Mexico, Bermuda, and it meets. The committee meets once a year, and any country can nominate a name to be retired, but it's based on impacts. Not about intensity per se, but just were there impacts in the country, significant loss of life and impacts. And the committee then discusses the merits of the retirement, and a vote is held. And if the committee votes for the retirement, the name is retired. Most of the time, the votes are pretty unanimous in that it's a pretty clear-cut case when a country brings a name, but not always. And then if the name is retired, replacement names are submitted and then voted upon, and a new name ends up on the list. I've actually been to the meeting now for a little more than a decade, and I've been casting the votes for the U.S. The last several meetings, and it is an interesting process and one I think the committee does take pretty seriously.
Yeah, but if a country says this was so damaging, we really would like it to be retired. I think most people are going to agree, right? There's no what's
Yep.
the downside, right?
Yep.
Although getting a little short on I names is a problem. Right?
Yeah, the committee's had some discussions recently about whether we should try to have at least some objective criteria. And we do get a little worried about sort of running out of easily pronounced common names to use.
Yeah.
The World Meteorological Organization has recently kind of asked all the different committees for all the different regions to try not to use names that are on other lists in other regions, or used retired names from those lists, which makes it a little tougher because a lot of the Australian names are very similar to our U.S. names.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we'll come up with a potential replacement name, but find out it's already been retired in the Australia region, which does make it sometimes tough to come up with replacement names for retired storms.
Yeah, way back in the day, they were kind of aware of this, I think, and there was an idea that names would only be retired for a certain amount of time, right? You would take them off the list for a while, but then they would uh, go back. But that was before we got into before 1979 when we got to the system that we have in place right now and have used since then. All right, Jordan.
Next question. This then about the forecasting process, kind of for Dan from Michael. When the NHC issues forecast tracks, are they only based on the models and meteorological judgment, or is there also a bias towards land impact in an effort to be cautious of land impact versus a harmless sea track?
Oh, good question, Michael. Dan?
Yeah, so we don't bias the forecasts, toward land. I mean, we want to put out the best forecast that we can. I will say that we do try to keep a fair amount of, be similar to the previous forecast. We don't want to make huge changes from forecast for cycle to cycle. So there is a level of consistency in the forecast, and such that when the models may be shifting in one direction, we may be a little slower than those models to adjust in that direction. But that has benefited us in many cases. You take, back to, I think it was Hurricane Ike many years ago. Maybe it was Harvey, or actually it was Laura. Too many storms. I think it was during Laura, there was a shift back toward Houston,
Right.
away from Southwest Louisiana with the guidance. We kind of held steady for a few cycles, and then the models began to shift back. So,
Right.
we're trying to make those forecast shifts more consistent, a little slower, and over time, it's really benefited us. When we've gone back and looked at maybe about a 3-year sample to see how consistent. And also look at our average errors, and at least of the individual models, like of the European GFS and the UK Met model, we tend to have, on average, lower errors and a more consistent forecast because we're trying to make these shifts slower. And that's really where the human comes into the process, is understanding how much to move a forecast from cycle to cycle. And I think here at NHC, I think we do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, and because if you think about it, the idea that whatever town, on the coast you're in the cone, you're out of the cone. If you followed the models, that would happen all the time, right? So the goal is to not have people doubt the process because it's flopping around, what they call the windshield wiper effect, right? So there is a communications level concern that comes into play, but it's not really a bias so much as trying to be sure that people have confidence in the way that the process is done and the forecasts are made. Jordan?
Yeah, so our TikTok viewers, a little bit of a follow up from earlier. We talked about a winter storm versus a hurricane. Now there's some questions of what about a nor'easter versus a hurricane? Because when they see a nor'easter, it looks a lot like a hurricane. Are they the same? Is there any correlation?
Well, they're both low pressure systems, but no, they're not the same. But I guess the interesting thing is that we talk about, is it tropical or is it not tropical? And Dan, if you saw the beginning, we were talking about the Gabrielle and how it really doesn't look tropical at the moment, and should they untropicalize it and call it something else temporarily, with the idea that it is likely or is forecast to become maybe even a hurricane coming up here in a few days. So I guess it probably is beneficial for everybody to describe these three stages, Dan, between what you look at to describe something as tropical, and then to subtropical, and then to nor'easter or non-tropical or extratropical.
Yeah, there really are those three different phases, and it's not always easy to put each cyclone in its little box. There are sort of gray areas in between those different cyclone types. Purely tropical, of course, it's what we call warm core system. It does not have any fronts attached to it. It's getting its energy from those showers and thunderstorms that are developing around the center, versus a wintertime type low, where it's getting its energy from the contrast of air masses, of warm and cold air masses, and
And
those
there are
systems
fronts involved, right?
and there are fronts involved. And
right.
just
You
this
always have a
just
cold
this
front, a
week,
warm front, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just this week we had that low pressure area off the coast of North Carolina. It got moderately strong off the coast of Virginia. Did bring some impacts there, but that system still had a front attached to it the entire time, and it did acquire a little bit of had a little bit of deep shower and thunderstorm activity kind of on the western side as it approached the coast. And it did, perk up some eyes as, oh, is it trying to transition? It might have been something that was just attempting to transition to something either subtropical or tropical, where it kind of has some characteristics of both, but it still had that front attached the entire time. And it was pretty clear that that front was still attached to that low pressure area, even as it approached the coast. And that's why, we didn't really mention the outlook. It wasn't ever really classified as, anything tropical, no NVAS or anything. And those local weather forecast offices of the National Weather Service were issuing, these non-tropical wind and coastal flood type messages to cover the hazards, they are covered in a different fashion. They are when there's tropical storm or hurricane with those tropical products.
Yeah, the front that's over Florida was attached to
Yep.
that thing. It's still here, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
The thing producing all the rain in South Florida, or related to the weather pattern producing all the rain in South Florida. And then you have that gray area in the middle, right? It's always well, it's not always difficult, but I guess we should explain warm core, because that gets thrown out very lightly. But it's actually the temperature. And by the way, the one on which I'm sure you guys were looking at too, Dr. Bob Hard at Florida State, created this website, which is the kind of the Bible on this subject of what state the core of the system is in. And he had that one kind of drifting into the warm core and then drifting back out of the warm core. It was right on the edge, never far into any one category. And I'm sure that raised some eyebrows and some attention at the Hurricane Center.
Yeah, we do use Bob Hart's website quite a bit to try to diagnose, whether it's going to be a warm core system and how symmetric the warm core is, and it's very helpful to help us diagnose, systems like that, as to whether again they may be more frontal or whether they're more tropical. And again, it's those subtropical systems that are kind of somewhere in between. They do have for those systems that are subtropical, they don't have the shower and thunderstorm, or they have the shower and thunderstorm activity, but they don't have those fronts attached. And oftentimes they don't have that inner core like like a hurricane, but they do have that thunderstorm activity that's just surrounding that more broad center. But those systems can fully transition. In fact, they often do fully transition into a tropical storm or hurricane, and in some cases that they fully become a hurricane and have an eye and become a classic looking hurricane.
Yeah, if they sit over the warm water long enough, really is what the requirement is there for that to happen. All right, Jordan?
Yeah, quick follow up on that. Can nor'easters become hurricanes?
Can nor'easters become hurricanes? I would say it's very unlikely, because nor'easters are kind of moving north and they're moving into colder water. I guess the challenging examples are Sandy and they're kind of going the other way, right? They're nor'easters, they're hurricanes to nor'easters more. That's right. What am I thinking? I was going to say the perfect storm, but again, that was a nor'easter absorbing a hurricane and had a similar structure to Sandy for a little while. But no, because they're moving north, so they're going to move over the cold water. I can't think of an example of that happening. No.
All right, so our next
thankfully.
question, kind of shifting a little bit. It's from TikTok. The 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Wilma is coming up. Any thoughts from both of you guys on Wilma?
You were here in Wilma, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So my big takeaway from Wilma is that Wilma in Miami-Dade County was rated at a Category 1, yet it did that tremendous amount of damage downtown Miami and Brickell Avenue, and Category 2 in parts of Broward and Palm Beach County, and of course did some areas significant damage, but it wasn't broadly a Category 2, I don't think, and maybe you know more, Dan. But it was at that time the third most expensive hurricane in the history of hurricanes, right? So the point is that when a hurricane, any hurricane hits a densely populated metropolitan area, it's a disaster, and it's a big, expensive disaster. So anyway, that's. But the good thing about Wilma was that it happened late in August, and it was so cool and refreshing after it that even though the power was out, that wasn't a big problem, which was really unusual for hurricane scenarios. Usually it's hot and miserable.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add there, Brian, is that the size. It had a very large eye, a very large sort of what we call radius of maximum winds, very large wind field, and that was why there was really a significant damage across all three counties here in Southeast Florida, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade, and really power outages across that entire region. I know some lessons were learned on the emergency management side about generators at things like grocery stores and gas stations, because it was very difficult to find a store that was open and gas across a 3-county area with a lot of population.
Yeah, so the really amazing thing about Wilma is it had that giant eye, so that the eye wall actually ended up being almost like why can't I think of the word? The derecho. I mean, it was, it was just this very almost vertical line of intense weather, and the winds were blowing, obviously, because we're going around from south to north. So it just blew and blew and blew really strong in these lines as it slowly moved over the metropolitan area. So yeah, it was, it reminded me of. Wasn't it Francis had this giant eye? I remember working that, and it was moving at like 5 miles an hour or something. I remember 2004, right? Yeah, that was that was an interesting year. All right, Jordan.
Hey, so our next question is a little bit of about the forecast. What are your thoughts on the 2 waves coming off of Africa?
All right, Gisele, you probably didn't see us at the beginning. We were talking about that, but go ahead and sum it up, Dan, from the Hurricane Center, and what you guys are thinking for the next week, right? And then we can make a brief mention about after that.
Yeah, the first wave we ended up taking out of the outlook, but still keeping an eye on it, especially as it moves into the Caribbean and Western Atlantic area, kind of 7 to 10 days from now. Nothing to worry about in the short term. And then the other system will be coming off Africa essentially tomorrow. Some chance of that forming as we get into next week, but even that one could stay on the weaker side for a while, but still something else to be tracking in that longer range period.
Yeah, these are the 2 systems that we were talking earlier about, the long range, especially the AI models, the Google AI model especially, but even the European, seems to pick up that after next week, then maybe the atmosphere becomes more conducive in the Western Caribbean or something. Just as a general statement, it shows some development out of one, or in some cases both of these. So they bear watching, even though nothing is imminent and no concern at this point for the Caribbean islands. But down the road, as we get closer to October, we'll definitely keep an eye on both of those. Hope they just die out. All right, Jordan.
Next question coming in from TikTok. Why do some hurricanes rapidly intensify like Ida in 2021?
All right, that's a great question for a forecaster. Describe the process. Well, there's 2 questions there really embedded in one, right? One is the why, the physical reasons why, but then how do you try and detect that so that you can warn people about it?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So, we're looking at, not only things that are favorable for development of storms, but it's really a lot of the same parameters that we need for strengthening. So it's a moist atmosphere, it's to have low wind shear, be over warm water. But you can have all those conditions, but still not get rapid strengthening. So what you really need for is the inner core to develop. And that's basically the formative stage of an eye or eye wall. And once we start to see that, then it's kind of all bets are off. That it's probably going to take advantage of that in surrounding environment, and you'll start to see that rapid strengthening. We saw that just a couple weeks ago, or I guess 3 weeks ago now, with Aaron, that we started to see that very small formative inner core. The surrounding environment was pretty favorable, and it really began to strengthen. So when we're sitting down making a forecast, we're really looking for that, looking to see if those, if those environmental conditions are very favorable, if that wind shear is very low, and then once we start to anticipate that inner core formation, that's when really you're going to start to see us forecasting rapid strengthening. And we've really seen a pretty dramatic improvement in forecasting rapid strengthening over the past maybe 5 to 10 years, such that our intensity forecast errors have been cut about in half in that time, because again, I think we're able to see that, and we use what we call microwave imagery a lot, which is it's a passive sensor that is in a polar orbit that passes over the storm, but it can kind of see the structure. It can see the water and ice beneath the clouds, and kind of take a look at the structure of that storm. And we really use those images a lot to be able to assess the structure of the storm, and again to see if it has that structure to be able to take advantage of what can be favorable environmental conditions.
And you have the guidance, the rapid intensification guidance now, and more guidance than ever, right? And I think more confidence in the guidance now than in the past. And remind me, and Aaron, did the guidance pick up on the rapid intensification, or was that more of a surprise?
It did, although it was suggesting it might take another 12 or 24 hours before rapid intensification to begin. It did occur a little bit sooner, and that often is one of the real challenges in forecasting rapid strengthening, is not only getting the fact that rapid strengthening may occur right, but it's getting the timing and then ultimately the magnitude of that rapid strengthening. Oftentimes when we forecast rapid strengthening, which is defined as about a 35-mile-per-hour increase in winds over a 24-hour period, when we forecast that, oftentimes it ends up strengthening even more, which still is a challenge. But we do, as you mentioned, we also have these hurricane regional models, the HWRF, HMON, and now the HAVS models that are able to really forecast rapid strengthening, although they are sometimes a little too aggressive at forecasting rapid strengthening. Yes. But it is another tool that we have that provides confidence in when that might occur.
Yeah, and there are statistical systems too that help in determining that. We just got the 5 o'clock advisory in, still a tropical storm, 50 miles per hour. Jordan, if you want to punch that up, we're going to take a chance here and actually show you the cone too. The cone, the stats come out easy, but so we have showing up a little cluster of thunderstorms. Actually, it's growing. It's not dying out. So indications are that maybe we'll see what happens there. All right, let me see if I can click over to the cone here and see if we can see that. Let's see the new cone. Looks, well, intensification up near Bermuda increased now up to 100 miles per hour. But I guess some of that intensification is probably related to the jet stream, right? It's getting some baroclinic enhancements, so to say, of the jet stream is pulling air out of the top, assuming it gets itself organized. But you've been on here with us, so maybe you don't know what the thinking completely is, Dan. But is that your sense that it just continues to just slowly struggle for a bit, and then, like we talked about earlier, finally moves into warmer water and moving north?
Yeah, it still looks like it's probably going to struggle for another, couple of days. But, again, wind shear is supposed to come down. I took a peek at some of the latest guidance models as we started this a little while ago, and they were forecasting. Even some of the global models are forecasting more strengthening now as it gets up near Bermuda and then starts to move northeastward. So not surprising that forecast shows a little more intensification later on. But I would say there's still a fair amount of uncertainty just because of its current structure and weak nature.
Yeah, and it is interesting that it died out last night, because usually the overnight period is when you get the thunderstorms, right? The atmosphere cools and the ocean doesn't cool, and so you get a bigger contrast, and you're more likely to get thunderstorms. So that just showed you how hostile the pattern was last night to really kind of wipe the thing out. All right, Jordan, what you got?
Yeah, it's actually about the 5 p.m. advisory. Some questions coming from TikTok. Will cruises be canceled to Bermuda? What are the exact impacts going to be? They see the 175 concerned about what are the exact impacts?
Well, the first thing is that the cruise lines aren't going to do anything unsafe. But the storm is going to put a lot of energy in the water, so you're going to have a bumpier ride, I would think. But it's not. They're not going to, try and dock in Bermuda if it's not safe to do that. So it really depends on the timing and where the storm is and where your ship is. Any thoughts, Dan?
No, I mean, I know those cruise industries. They're looking at the forecast. We have a group here that does marine forecasts as well, and they are monitoring that both for the storm path, but also the seas, because the wave action that propagates away from these storms is not very comfortable on a cruise ship. So I do know that they take those safety precautions at hand. And have to make those decisions on where it's safe to go.
Yeah, and there are, if you haven't seen them, there are computer models that forecast the seas and so forth. So they tend to try and avoid uncomfortable areas. But huge cruise ships, they have stabilizers and everything, so they're going to take care of you. You don't have to worry about that. But whether there's going to be an issue with Bermuda, that's an open question, I guess, depending on the timing of your cruise. Jordan?
Yep. Another question, somewhat related to the 5 p.m. advisory. Any hurricane hunter plans? What makes you guys decide to send the hurricane hunters to a storm?
All right, Dan. You mentioned this earlier. When are you going to decide whether to send it? Was it tomorrow? Was your time?
So
Time
yeah,
frame?
so we started planning for that. Really, this day and age, for to get aircraft in place to get to the storm, we start planning really several days in advance. So we've been talking. We have a unit here at the Hurricane Center that helps coordinate that with both the Air Force and NOAA. And right now, the plan is for them to do some forward deployments as early as tomorrow, and then be able to fly into the storm beginning on Saturday afternoon, and then additional flights on Sunday. And again, we fly these whenever the system is a threat to land. At the moment, it's still not certain how close it will get to Bermuda, but we're planning as if it could get close, and we would need those flights to help make the forecast even better.
So if Gabrielle pulls itself together and the models kind of focus well to the east of Bermuda, then you're not going to fly all the way out there just to look at it. Although sometimes there are research flights, right, that are planned. So you go ahead and do that, and go ahead and do the research while you have a storm available, I guess.
That's correct, and I think that NOAA was planning to do some research flights. So even if we don't task any operational missions, they still may do some flights and do research.
Yeah, and depending on what they're doing, you can look at that data sometimes, right?
Correct. Yep.
Although if the storm pulls itself together, then we can have more confidence in what the forecast is. Okay, Jordan?
Yeah, we get your last questions then. We're starting to run out of time a little bit, maybe only one or two more questions. The first one coming also from our TikTok audience. Any concerns for travel to the Caribbean islands over this weekend? Some weekend plans, last minute trips as people are going back to school and such. Any concerns for tropical impacts?
Well, I would say no concerns for tropical impacts, except that it is hurricane season and it is tropical season. So you get moisture surges, tropical waves coming through. The weather can be a bit disruptive, but I don't know. I don't see any dangerous weather for the Eastern Caribbean. Do you, Dan?
No, but you make a good point. Just there could be some waves and rainfall. I know there was some rainfall around Puerto Rico this morning. So it's a time of year that as those waves pass, you're likely to see an increase in shower and thunderstorm activity and potentially heavy rainfall.
Yeah, and they can be gusty downpours too with these moisture surges in the tropics, and these disturbances that the Hurricane Center has been tracking. They're only down to one now, but there's still other ones still out there. Is likely to come through the islands has a moisture surge. I think the current models say about next Tuesday. So then the other one will be kind of behind that. So, plan for some wet periods if you go to the Caribbean, but otherwise there shouldn't be any big disruptions. Jordan?
Yeah, I think that actually wraps it up for today. Not very many more questions.
Okay, great. All right, Dan Brown, the branch chief of the forecasters unit at the National Hurricane Center. Thank you so much, Dan. Always great to talk to you and great to have your expertise. And thanks to everybody who watched and wrote in here this afternoon. So anyway, hopefully we're not in touch with you at all this hurricane season, Dan, and we all can take a break. But there's no guarantees at all. We have a long month to go here before we really expect hurricane season to taper off. So, all right, everybody, have a good day, and we'll see you back here next week. Next week is the 1-year anniversary of Helene, and we're going to be talking all about that on Fox Weather next week. And we'll be here with Paul Delegato, who is the Fox 13 chief meteorologist in Tampa, talking about all the issues with Helene on an ongoing basis there and how Tampa's doing and what lessons we learned. So if you are not getting Fox Weather regularly, let me just tell you how to do it real quick. You go to foxweather.tv, and it's going to tell you how to get the Fox Weather channel on your TV, your phone, your iPad, your computer, all for free on all the time. And then we'll see you there. And of course, we'll have full coverage on an ongoing basis, and especially if there is any kind of threat anywhere. All right, everybody, have a good day. We'll see you next week.